Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon again. And these were some of the things which we are looking at, the stages in tender. So basically, let's not worry about the feed part. We are only looking at ourselves as contractors. You see a notice which says, I want to do a job. You take a call whether you want to do it or not. Okay. So typically what happens in an organization we will be seeing in today's class. And then you need to prepare a bid which will make the person want to take it up. Okay. See, if suppose you are going to go to a hotel, okay, with a family, for instance, you have one which is not looking so nice but food is great, or the one, like 100 Heritage where everything looks nice but probably the food is not really very great. Which one would you really prefer to take a person to? If suppose you want to impress somebody, maybe a girl or boy, whatever. So where is the place that you are likely to go? Wherever the presentation is nice is typically the place where we tend to go. This is true for every organization. Okay. If suppose you are going to join VIT, why did you join VIT? It might have been probably the good advertisement, good PR which we do. That's probably the main reason why people tend to come to an organization. That's the truth about anything. Suppose you are a contractor. If suppose I come to you and say, sir, will my house withstand earthquake? What is your answer? You will say yes. So this is the way we sell our product. We make ourselves look nice. If you look at all the business school graduates, you'll find that they're all coming with a tie, right? They're trying to enhance their personality, however bad they are, to make them look really great. Okay, so this is the thing which is there for everything, and everywhere there's going to be negotiation. Again, there can be single stage or two-stage bidding where you only go for the price straight, or you show yourself as pre-qualifying for the job and then taking it up. Then there's the execution part. There's an obligation by the contractor to deliver something, and there's the obligation of the owner to pay. So whether both these obligations are met, that is something which is very important. And if you remember, even in our tender wizard for CPWD, there's a column which scrolls with the corrigendum. The corrigendum is nothing but the amendment or other things which come up later on. Sometimes after the signing of the contract, something may come up where you go for change or variation clause, and sometimes before the contract is signed, the owner will decide that he's going to take do a certain change. Okay, so it all depends upon but anyway, amendments are mostly inevitable. So how the whole thing is negotiated plays a very important role. Of course, there will be an audit. There may be some statutory audits. For example, if you are going to do a nuclear power plant, you are going to have a whole lot of people coming and auditing your work. Okay, so whether it's really safe, whether it's going to work, and then based on that only the report is given. Certain contracts, like for example, if you are supplying material to a person or to an agency, after a period of 1 year, the contract might be renewed. Okay, for instance, your hostel mess, the contract gets renewed annually. Okay, so that could also happen, and then people can say what they are going to have. Again, I'm just trying to remind you that these are the contents of a contract document. So please just go through this and try to put whatever you are seeing in any one of the parts. Okay, so these are some of the things you agree upon. You agree upon the rate, you agree upon the EMD or the earnest money. Then you agree upon the manner in which the payment is going to be done, or the schedule by which the payment is going to be done. It can be running, like it can be something which is a running bill. What's a running bill? Suppose you are supplying cement to cement bags. You will have a contract which says that I will place an order of 3,000 to say 4,000 bags of cement per month. So in 1 month, if I am taking 3,200 bags, you will raise a bill for 3,200, and then there might be an upper cap. It means that overall I'll be supplying 30,000 bags over a period of 10 months. That might be the contract. So based on the minimum and maximum, you will be raising bills. Again, there can be the final bill where, like it's a very minor work, you only raise one bill, get it paid. Okay, so that is one way of making a payment. Again, we spoke about escalation yesterday. It is linked to petrol, oil and lubricants cost, or it can be linked to the inflation rate which is happening in the country, or it can be linked to the fluctuation in the US dollar or euro or some recognized currencies rate. So all of this is going to be mentioned in the beginning, it's going to be agreed in the beginning, and based on that only everything is going to be done. Again, there's going to be a time of completion which is going to be specified. You cannot take a job and work on it indefinitely. There is going to be a fixed start, there is going to be a fixed time when you finish. If you finish earlier, you may get a bonus, and all of that is also generally mentioned. Sometimes the bonus can be made a little higher than what is agreed upon initially also. That's also perfectly okay. Okay. So then, progress measurement. You will have what is known as milestone charts which are made. So it's important work which we thought is to be done complete. For example, earthwork, completion of earthwork or leveling the ground is considered as a milestone activity. Completion of all the foundation works is considered as a milestone activity. Depending on the project, you will establish milestones, and based on that, establish your payment schedules also. So when you go through your tender document, please go through the, I told that there will be another tender document which I did in the previous semester uploaded. I will be doing it today. So in that, if you see, they will have given the payment schedule. If you do this much of work, so much percentage of the total amount will be released for payment. Okay. So all of that will be mentioned. The progress is measured, and based on the progress, you are going to get paid. So this is something which always happens. Then you may subcontract a work. For example, you may not be a specialist in all the fields. You may find that somebody is very good at piling. For example, there's a company called Keller. So if piling is there, or stone columns, there's another type of foundation called stone columns. If stone columns is to be done, all the big EPC players will go to Keller and get their foundation work done. It's cheaper for us because we don't have to invest in a lot of equipment and expertise, which is already available with Keller. So this is an example of subcontracting. Okay. So many other things get subcontracted, like for example, the security system in a guards in a complex, that can be subcontracted. You don't have to worry about furnishing the security guards. Maybe the housekeeping facility. Every big site needs a little bit of housekeeping done. You don't have to do the housekeeping by yourself. You can subcontract it. And so on and so forth. Concreting alone can be subcontracted. So what you can do, you can say, okay, Ramco Cements, you furnish the ready mix concrete for my site. So you are subcontracting the concreting works to somebody else. So this is perfectly allowed, perfectly legal, but the subcontractor is going to have to obey all the rules of the owner, and if he misbehaves, the subcontractor misbehaves, the onus or the penalty will be on the main contractor, not on the subcontractor. Okay, so that is something which you should be a little familiar with. Of course, the contractor will have ways of screwing up the subcontractor. Okay, so there will be something which is there. One of the things which I didn't mention in yesterday's class was force majeure. What is this? In every project, there is a thing which we put as act of God. Okay, which we say, do you remember any recent act of God? Huh? Kolkata flyover collapse. Huh? No. What are the first response people told? It's an act of God. Got it? So what happens is, whatever be it, the first thing they put it was act of God. I'm not saying it's an act of God. That is the best way to escape out of trouble. Okay? So you're right. It was a man-made disaster. But in any case, you see, the first response they gave was, it was an act of God. I am putting this because what are acts of God? Usually it is floods, war, or riots. These are not in the control of the contractor. So because of that, if there is a delay, you can bring out the force majeure clause, especially war. All of this is not in the hands of the contractor. Again, the change and valuation and variation is something which we, sorry.
You are my honey.
That was my wife. Okay, now let's. Okay, got it. Now, sorry, very sorry. I didn't realize it was on. That really threw me off, huh? Okay, so coming back here, we have what is known as the public-private partnership. Okay, it's one of the most popular modes of contracting now. It's one of the best ways to privatize almost every aspect of our national property. Earlier, we had a department called National Highways Authority of India who used to look after all the roads. But now, almost all the roads have become toll roads. All the major roads are become toll roads. What happens here? A public sector company, a private sector company comes forward to the government, takes up the job, executes it, maintains it, and also funds it. He gets a return by way of the toll which he collects. So this is what we call as public-private partnerships. Airports have been developed with public-private partnership. Any airport you have visited recently where they got a user convenience fee? Delhi airport, for instance, if you land in Delhi, the user convenience fee or whatever they charge is quite a significant amount. Okay, so what actually happens is the person who's using, for example, you're going on a road, for getting a good road where you can go at a little high speed, you're forced to pay a toll. You pay a toll and then only you are able to use the facility. So these are some of the modes in which they do: build, own, operate. Okay, build, operate, transfer. Build, own, operate, and then transfer. It will be transferred back to the public sector company which first let out the job. What happens is, in a public-private partnership, because you are going to operate it for 25 years, you are going to put in good material. Because if suppose the wearing course of the road is peeling off every year, it means it's a repetitive cost for the private party who is maintaining it to be replacing it over and over again. Again, if you see near most of the toll plazas, you'll also see a weighbridge. So they ensure that overloaded trucks do not use the facility, because that's a very common problem, not only in India, anywhere around the world, trucks tend to overload and take. So these are some of the common problems which we usually face, which public-private partnership brings down to a large extent. You get good infrastructure, the only problem is the cost of using the facility might increase. Okay, the end user might wind up paying quite a lot of money. So this is something which I must say that it's this is what is the public-private partnership. You would have seen the buses, JNRUM. That's also done under something like this mode. Okay, and many times they'll have what are known as special purpose vehicles, SPVs floated, which will be taking care of funding, which will be taking care of all the aspects to facilitate ease in ensuring this these such projects happen. Okay, so you can just go through this. There's a lot of material available in about PPP. It will be a little boring if suppose I keep talking only about that. Okay, but I'll be very glad if you are going to ask specific questions, which I'll be very happy to address. Okay, but please go through. So, for example, even using Wikipedia and stuff like that is good enough for understanding what these modes of contracts are. Okay. Now, I'll just go through the tender process, which is typically taken up in an organization. If you join an organization and you happen to get into the tendering department, initially, you may not have a lot of interesting work. The work you will be given is take printout, go and get signed, take printout, bind it. Okay. How many of you recognize this pattern? Where do you do it? Yes, in clubs and chapters, typically that is how you start off your career. But if you go into the organization and you are going into something a little responsible, you will find that is the work which you are actually asked to do. Not a very interesting thing, no? But the smart people, they actually tend to read. They don't say, I have to take it from boss 1 to boss 2, I have to put the rubber stamp. The really smart candidate is the one who is going to be able to glance through the documents he is going with and understanding what is there. Okay? So what are the things you can understand? What is the nature of the project? Okay, you can understand the layout. If you are just going through the document, you will be in a position to understand what types of specification different clients are trying to give. It depends purely upon the person who is doing the work. The initiative which that person takes. So you will actually find that if you are doing a tender job, you are doing an entire gambit of project which many people do not have the opportunity to do. But it is a one with lot of risk also, because when a tender fails, your organization has spent a lot of money for which it is not getting any return. But if you are successful in a tender, then it means that your organization is continuously able to sustain growth. Okay, you take one job, based on that you take 2 more. So that is how the organization grows. Okay, so these are some of the things. You will finalize the design aspects and the specification, what you are going to sell to the client. So that is the second thing. You will make your own detailed drawings. Detail will be according to the nature of the project. So suppose you are going to go for a residential project, you may have to make a lot of 3D sketches, walkthroughs and stuff like that before you are able to make a successful bid. Okay, so then you will have to do some detailed estimates. Again, the amount of details is based on the type of job. For example, if you are taking a residential project, you will find that the major cost is from the finish items. What are the finish items? Your flooring, your plastering, your painting, and probably it's a little bit of landscape. These will be coming to a significant cost. It means that you cannot afford to do a very detailed estimate before you give it for, before you price it. Again, lot of contractors are there willing to take up a residential project because it's very straightforward. Many people are having the experience in such a project. So it means that you are having to make it so so compelling that anybody who is looking at your bid wants to use you as their contractor. Okay, so then again you will have to finalize how you are going to execute your work, whether you are going to use cranes, whether you are going to use slip forms, whether you are going to try to precast a lot of elements. All of these are strategic decisions which the organization takes based on its previous experience. And then again, mostly what happens is you cannot come to a price bid unless and until you have somebody supplying it at a cost you are expecting it. So initially, before the job is awarded itself, usually what happens is the procurement teams will talk with their suppliers and try to fix a supplier for the project. There will be an understanding that you supply me at this cost, I will come to you only for the job. And this is done much before the job is awarded itself. Okay, so these are the things which you usually do in an organization. Okay, so you will be having to study drawings. You may have to make drawings by yourself. You will have to read the specification. You may have to give an alternate specification. You will have to visit the site. If you look at any of the tender document, there will be a clause: contractor to visit the site, ascertain the condition and satisfy himself on every aspect before he submits the bid. It means that the owner is literally washing his hands off. I'll give you one example which you can see with your eyes. When you come inside VIT now, are you able to see a change? How many of you observe the change? What do you think is going to happen now? There's a road expansion happening. Now, did you notice any problem which might be there? Any problem? Have you observed any problem which could be there? Sorry? Level. What exactly? That is the problem which is happening. Why is there a problem with the leveling? It's rocky surface. It's a rocky surface. Okay, that's exactly the thing. See, we bid for a project in Rajasthan. Um, so there were Suratgarh and RRVNL Suratgarh and I'm forgetting the other place. Two identical power plants, same layout, but then one was on sandy soil, other was on rock. Okay, so what happens is when you are facing rock, you will have to go for blasting. Okay, you will have to do a lot of other things. See, if you now what happens here is the contractor might have seen it was all full of grass. There might have been small stones only observed. Now the smart contractor or the contractor who's burnt his finger or an engineer like you who's observing such a situation will know that it's like the Titanic iceberg. Only a very small portion is coming out. Okay, so you will be smart enough and say this contract is valid for ground clearing for boulders up to this size. Anything beyond this will be charged extra. Now, what would happen if you are on the owner's side and you know that there is very deep rock? You'll immediately say no, tender stipulation prevail. This is what any contractor, any owner will say. Are you willing to agree that you have to do the ground clearing at this expense? So they'll just put it, tender stipulations will prevail. So that means you will have to take the risk and then increase the cost for earthwork if you want to be safe. Okay. Now I'll just tell you for your information, if a rock is there, these are the methods which you can use. See, they are drilling holes. You can drill along the excuse me, planes of weakness, and you'll find that it will just cut like a piece of cake. It will just break. Rocks have planes of weakness, and you can, if you drive the steel stakes at the right position, it will just split. Now, sometimes you may not be able to do that. So what we do is we use rock breakers, which might also not work. Then we start to pour acid. Again, you can pour acid for certain kinds of rocks. Especially, limestone based rocks, they'll just disappear. And certain types of sandstones might be able to withstand the acids which you are using. Okay, so that is another way you try to do. Yet another way was there, which we used, where the rock was so hard, we started to have a very huge fire. You have a very huge fire, and then you suddenly quench it with ice cold water. So what happens is thermal difference which is there, rapid cooling will cause thermal stresses to break the rock. Okay, so you see, sometimes when dynamite cannot, I don't think they'll use dynamite in front of VIT. Okay, they may or may not. So they may not like to use dynamite. So what is the option? The option is you need to use something out of the ordinary. I've seen some bottles, probably they were acid bottles, which they are using to try to break the rock. Okay, so you will have to ascertain the site facility before you start the job. Okay, you don't know what is lying underneath. For example, existing facility, what is this? Is there an underground high tension wire going? You just cannot start to break the rock or use an excavator randomly. If suppose you hit a high tension cable, the cost of replacing the cable is so much higher than, like what we call as trial pits. So we'll make small pits, see what is inside. But again, that also costs money. To ascertain existing facility also costs money. So all of these are things which you need to try to do before you execute a big job, especially. Labor facility. So if suppose you are doing a very big job, you need to source the labor. You need to house them in the campus. If you are housing the labor force in the campus, you have to think of some entertainment and also way to cook food for them. Cooking food may be 10 rupees or 20 rupees for you. But for the laborer, it means a whole world of difference. Okay, so it depends. Like if you are doing some small things, you will find that you are going to save a lot of time. The time which it takes to go and come, you save at least. And then what is lead and lift? Can anyone tell what is this lead and lift? We were talking about it in the last class. Lead. Huh? Not bonus. Remember we were talking about the truck, soil, the distance to which, horizontal distance to which you move material is called lead. You may be bringing bricks from 20 kilometers. That is the lead for bricks. Okay. You may be taking the excavated spoils away from the site for 15 kilometers. That is the lead. Lift is the vertical distance over which material has to be transported. Okay. Lift is the vertical distance over which material is transported. Again, if the lift is very large from below the ground, you may have to think of dewatering. You may have to think of slope protection. All these are costs which are very important to be considered at the time of your tender study. When you are studying your tender, all of this has to be put into action. So this is the thing about specification. So essentially it just gives guidelines or the basis for which actions are going to be taken by both the parties. Okay, so you can have contract specification, what is going to be the legal part. Okay, then you may have some guidelines which are given. Okay, guidelines for doing a particular action. So that is the guide specification. Some consultants or some owners will have a fixed specification which they have done, which is common for all projects. So that's a general specification. Detailed specification will go right up to how we are going to finish flooring, how many thickness is going to be the paint, what is the exact color of the paint. All of this could be coming under your detailed specification. And again, for some of the items are manufactured. For example, the steel truss, that's a manufactured item. So what is going to be the manufacturing procedure? What is the welding specification which is going to be done? What is the bolting? What is the lifting? All of that would come under manufacturing specification. Okay. So these are some of the specifications which you kind of get. Okay. So usually a general specification will give you the class of work, type of work, and the quality to which you are required to finish the job. Okay. So this is the general specification. And a detailed specification can be for a particular item of work, for a material. For example, what is the way the brick, what should be the specification of brick? If you are not using brick, you are using some alternate material, minimum parameter which it should satisfy will be given by the material specification. Again, you may find that today river sand, natural river sand is very difficult to get. So you may be able to allow to use a different material. Okay. For example, M sand or manufactured sand as we call it can have the same specification, satisfy the same specification of river sand or the sand which we have or the specification which we have for plastering. Okay. So they'll just say these are the guidelines which you should follow. So that would be given in the detailed specification. Method statement, how are you going to do the concreting? So what is the temperature to which or at which you are allowed to concrete? How you are going to plaster this? Doing the ceiling plastering is difficult because the plaster is applied almost vertically upward, and then you have to finish it, which is very difficult. So for instance, for each item of work, like how brickwork is going to be done, how plastering is going to be done, like plastering of walls, plastering of roof, soffits. So everything will be given. So this is what we call as the method statement. Okay. Then we also have supervision requirement. So who is going to supervise? If suppose you look at the contract document, you are told, guys, the ones at the last row, please. Okay. So they will be giving how much penalty is there if engineer is not available at site. So much detail is also given in the site, because they say that they feel that an engineer with say 15 years of relevant experience will be in a good position to help get the right finish or take critical decisions in site. Okay. Again, there is the test and acceptance criteria. Okay. For instance, every batch of concrete which is poured, you need to have cubes collected. How many of you have noticed this when you went for your internship? You would have. Did you see the cubes being samples taken? For every pour, they'll have a pour card, and they'll also have the cubes kept and tested. So that if suppose it satisfies the test, then only the owner is requiring to accept it. If suppose it fails, he may impose a fine or a penalty. again, what would be the remedy? Are you going to, suppose a column is not having the desired strength, are you going to ask them to break it and then redo it, or are you going to allow some strengthening methods? So all of this is available in the detailed specification. So when you go through all of this, you will find that, if you are giving good alternatives, the buyer is going to be very impressed. He is giving me a better technology. He is going to use a better method of doing things. So again, the layout is very important. Sometimes you may say, sir, why do you want to keep the main building first? Or why don't you keep the residential part in the front, keep the academic part a little in the back? So you can suggest some layout changes which might appeal to the owner. Okay, you can also go for alternate construction methodologies. Okay, now you just have a look at this. How is this standing? Is it a cantilever or is it a balanced cantilever? So it's a balanced cantilever. So it means that you are saying that I am not going to use the regular technology where you put a prop and then you block a road. Suppose it's a flyover project. If you are blocking the road, you need to get so many permissions. You need to do a lot of peacekeeping with so many departments. Now instead of that, Metro Rail is going to be constructed using this balanced cantilever. No disruption of traffic is told by one contractor. Will it not be more attractive to the buyer? So this is what you are expected, or which makes you a leader and makes you want to makes the company want to give the job to you. Okay. Then again, if you are going to schedule smart, okay, if you make a very good schedule, like you take into account holidays, you take into account seasons, and you ensure that the scheduling is such that the job can be compressed. That is going to give you an edge over your competitors. That's going to give you an edge over the competitors. So these are some of the things which is expected of us as engineers when we sit and work for a contract. When we do this, when we give better layout, when we give better material, when we give shorter times, or any other thing which is different from the others, that is the time when you are going to get the job. Okay, I'll just introduce this international tenders. Okay, so this is the definition of international tender. Okay, and it can be within the so this is you can work with different currencies. You can try to get talent from different places and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll just ask you to go through this website, web.worldbank.com. Okay, so now I'll just tell you okay, so these are the benefits of tendering. I just want to go for one part. Okay, sometimes because the tender is for example, NTPC tenders are not very desirable for very big companies, because NTPC has got a very standard way of doing the job. Anybody who's having a little experience can successfully finish a NTPC job. Okay, so that is why many of the big companies may not participate in a job offered by NTPC. Okay, other thing is these are some of the other things are quite clear. So that's what we mean by saying that the low margins may prevent leaders from taking part in the tender. Okay, so what I want you to take home is we've seen a lot of type of tenders. Yesterday we saw some 6 modes of tender. Today we had the PPP, the public-private partnership. Please remember, the public-private partnership can also fall in any one of the parts which we saw earlier, like turnkey project or anything for the matter. Okay, so it is just one more additional type which will fall into the 6 standard forms of contract which we saw earlier. Okay, so today the aim is that you take home with you the advantages and disadvantages of various kinds of tenders. So with this I finish this lecture. It's 2:49. I just managed to finish, I guess. And if you have any questions, please ask, or please think about, we've been speaking a lot of things. I've spoken for too long. I really thank you all for your patience. Okay, you all were very patient. So I hope you are taking home with you this benefits of the tendering system, what you are going to see in a tender document. Okay, your eyes should be trained to see the right things in a tender document. For example, what is going to be the critical specification? What is the hidden penalty clause which is there? What is the hidden bonus clauses which are available? So when you do this, you will avoid the penalties, try to get the bonus, and then make a you will be a very successful contractor. Okay, so I wish you all the best, and we'll meet again on Monday. Okay, so please come in time. Bye.